is a hard act to follow.
Oh.
It's funny. I never did think I would hear from you again. I really didn't. You were a person asking for help, and I gave help. And thank you, Rick, and Joe. And it's just funny because all these aspects of my life don't usually come together in one place. I mean, there's my close-up world, and there's my fighting for gay rights world, and then there's fighting for victims of domestic violence, which is very personal to me, very personal. Many of you know, maybe some of you don't know in this room, why it's so personal to me. The very first law I ever wrote in my life, I was just a few years out of law school. I wrote because my sister had been murdered by her husband. And my parents, my wonderful parents, my mom was in the doorway, she's still signing people in. My dad's here somewhere, right there. My parents were unable to see my nephew and my niece. My nephew's right there, by the way. Where's he? Where's Sammy?
He stepped out.
Oh, he stepped out. Oh, there he is. There's Sammy. There he is. I was talking about it. Anyway, they were unable to see them because the laws were bad in Tennessee. So the way the law was written, at the time my sister was killed, the law read that if you abuse children, you can be taken away, the children can be taken away and brought to someone else's care. But if you abuse or even murder your wife or a girlfriend or someone else, that was considered irrelevant to whether or not you were a good dad, whether or not you could take care of kids. And I remember reading that law and thinking that was atrocious, and then it was used against us. My parents tried very hard to see the grandchildren they love, my godson, my goddaughter, who I had promised my sister I would take care of if anything happened to her, so it was very personal to me. And we weren't allowed to see them because of a really, really dumb law. And so, just a few years out of law school, I was like, well, I can write a law. I'm gonna write a law. And I wrote a law. And I went to a Tennessee legislature, Democrat, but didn't have to be a Democrat because the idea that if you're a murderer, you may not be a good dad, that was something that was pretty persuasive. And it wasn't just Democrats, it was Republicans. And I wrote the law, argued it in committee, went on the House floor, the Tennessee legislator invited me to speak to the bill, and the law passed unanimously, signed by the governor of Tennessee. I was in my 20s. I mean, I was just a few years out of law school, and already, and then, you know, it wasn't so much for my family, though it did help my family, but because it was wrong. And we had to do something about it. We had to change the law. And after that, I started realizing, wow, I can change laws. You know, I can actually do something. I can make this world a better place. I can do things that actually make a difference. It's very empowering. It's one of the messages, it's like I gave to Clarissa, don't ever give up. Don't ever say that because this is unjust, I just can't win. My whole life has been about trying to make things a little more just, a little better. I mean, that's why I work on marriage equality. Rick has been involved for 20 years. I've been involved for 15 years, so you're outdoing me by a few years. But when I got involved in California, it was considered a radical idea. Such a completely radical idea that gay people, lesbian couples, should have the same right to marry as straight people did. That when I wrote a law in California that would give equal rights to gay and lesbian couples, which I still believe is the first one ever written in the United States, and presented it to a lesbian, openly lesbian assemblywoman in California, she told me, Mark, that's very nice. We'll never live to see marriage equality in our lifetimes. Go help victims of AIDS. And I said, I care very strongly about victims of AIDS. It's another story in my life. Maybe some of you know, some of you don't know. 11 months before my sister was killed, my boyfriend died of AIDS. He was 35 years old, and in fact, he couldn't get the protease inhibitors he needed that might have saved his life. I can't say that they would have, I don't know that. But they weren't legal at the time. The FDA hadn't approved them yet. Interestingly, he died in the peak year, 1995, when more Americans died of AIDS in that year than any other year. After that, it went sharply down because of protease inhibitors. I tried like hell to get him those drugs. I couldn't legally do it. and again started to learn that just because something is obviously right doesn't mean the law is good, doesn't mean it can be done. It's just not the case. We cannot assume that the authorities are always going to get it right and that the right thing and the just thing is always done. You have to work for it. That's probably when I first learned the lesson. Anyway, when this Assemblywoman said, go help victims of AIDS, I said, I strongly support that, but I can do more than one thing at the same time. And that's when I presented this bill. I actually had to help elect straight legislator, a guy named Paul Koretz. I'll say his name now because he's the hero of the story. And he introduced the bill that I wrote. It would have been the first full marriage equality bill in the United States. And at the time, it's hard to believe, but actually leading gay organizations opposed it, considering equality to be too radical a goal. I have never considered equality to be too radical a goal. Anyway, so luckily by the time I worked with Rick, that was about 10 years later, it was not only seen as not an impossibility, but as an inevitability, and instead we were working hard to craft a bill that would get through Congress, that they would accept, that we'd defeat the referendum. And even that was kind of early. D.C. had only like 5 states or something, 6 states before D.C. But this is a larger point here. More than domestic violence, more, Carissa brought up survivors of institutional abuse. Let me tell you a little bit about this group, SIA, because I found them by accident. This started with a radio show. I did a radio show, and I found out that kids all across the country are being put in these boot camps, these wilderness camps, some of them called residential treatment centers. What they really are, some of them are prisons. And these kids have done nothing wrong. They have not broken the law. But parents have troubled kids, or they want to teach them tough, and they send these kids away where they are brutally treated, sometimes sexually abused. And there are virtually no regulations. You cannot abuse your child, but apparently in many states, including Virginia, you can outsource abuse. And these awful groups actually forbid children from even talking to their parents on the phone. They monitor the conversations. And if you say something wrong to your parents, you get put at the bottom level. Oftentimes that means no food. Sometimes it means being locked up in a closet. Sometimes it means a lot worse. Now, the people who are survivors of these places are extremely powerless. They have no voice. They have virtually no money because they have virtually no education, because these places where we're supposed to educate them didn't educate them at all. They're just people who are in pain. And I found out about them through a radio show, delved into more, found out these places really do exist, and they aren't regulated. And so I work to help this group of people. That's why I get awards from the survivors of institutional abuse. I think I wrote a bill with Congressman George Miller to regulate these at the federal level. It passed the House. It did not pass the Senate. Republicans filibustered. I guess they considered it too much regulation. I don't know. It's something that I would work on in Virginia. Now, I fully recognize that this is not something that affects a lot of people in this room. But when a child is being held against his or her will and is being brutally treated, how can we not reach out and save those children? And I'm proud to say, out of the 10,000 children in these places, I have saved 3 of them. Now, that's not many, but it's 3 lives, including one I threatened to say the mayor of Provo, Utah permitted kidnapping, and finally they relented and they released this kid back to Massachusetts. The point is, whatever your individual stories are, whatever your individual care about, you need to know that I have a very strong passion for justice, for helping out the powerless. There are a lot of struggling families in Virginia. There are struggling families in the 45th. And I was just talking to a waiter the other day about the fact that the minimum wage, as low as it is in Virginia, $7.25, for a waiter, it's $2.13 an hour. Okay, now they're supposed to be able to use tips to go up to the minimum wage, but if you don't get enough, who are you going to complain to? Your boss? The same guy who can say, oh, you're not going to work on Saturday night. You're going to work on Tuesdays from 3 to 5 when there's not much traffic. And people are getting below the minimum wage. This $2.13 has not been raised in more than 25 years. And in fact, you can go back 35 years and it was about $2.01. So it really hasn't effectively changed for 35 years. We have waiters and waitresses, servers, and not just them, but bellhops, others, people who work for tip wages, who can't make enough an hour to buy a cup of coffee that they're serving to people. Now, that's atrocious. That's nothing that anyone in this room would support. And these aren't just people talk, well, you know, kids, these aren't just college kids. These are many people trying to protect their families. And so, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's equality under the law, many of you know, obviously I worked for Congressman Barney Frank. I worked on a whole number of issues for him, some big, some small. Some very much out in the open, some very much behind the scenes. I know a lot of you have know my radio show, know my TV show. I want to let you know that I do a lot of things behind the scenes that aren't really talked about. One thing I brought up for the first time last year that Barney helped me, well, I negotiated for him, was to protect victims of September 11th, because gay couples weren't getting the same benefits straight couples were. We had an argument with the Bush administration. And so one of the best ways to work with Republicans sometimes is to propose something, and then if they don't agree with you, basically let it be known that, well, you can go public with the ways they're being unfair, and they may not like that. And that actually worked well. I kind of watched how Barney worked. And it was very clear that George Bush didn't want to give equal benefits to gay couples because he'd have problems on the right. They wouldn't like that equality. At the same time, he knew that if we complained that he wasn't treating people fairly, he would look bad to most fair-minded Americans. So we made a deal. Barney made the deal, but I was there when it was made. And the deal was very simple. As long as you, the Bush administration, give gay and lesbian couples, survivors of September 11th, the same equal rights under the law that everyone else gets, we won't tell anyone you've done it. And that was our deal. It's a very simple deal. Very simple deal. As long as we were getting equal rights, we didn't have to crow about it. It wasn't, in fact, I talked to Barney, and I could talk about it last year, because it's all done now, and it's all equality, we don't have to worry about it. But at the time, that was a very serious issue. But whatever the issue is, I want you to know, I understand representative democracy. I believe it. I believe in it strongly. I have used it. I have gone to my elected representatives. I have demanded things. And I want you to know that I'll be here for you. And I'll be here for the citizens of the 45th. And if you have an issue, if you have a need, it doesn't matter whether it's on schools, or transportation, or fighting climate change, or regulating guns, or helping unions, all the issues that we all care about. The other people running this race are also progressive. I think that we probably agree on 90% of issues. But I'm someone who's been in the trenches. I've negotiated with Republicans. I've written legislation. I've written legislation a lot, not just working for Barney, also as a citizen activist. I know how to write legislation. I know how to negotiate with Republicans. I know how to get something bipartisan done. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we need. It's getting take some questions. I do want to say this though. This is a job for everyone in this room. Okay, God knows I can't do this alone. I can't do this with even half of you. I need all of you. I need your friends. I need your colleagues. A lot of people haven't met me. If I would encourage you just to tell them to meet me. Just have lunch with me. I'm going to meet lots of times around the district. I'll be in coffee houses. Ask them just to talk to me. And whatever their issues are, we're going to have a conversation. I want people to know who I am, and that's really all I'd ask of you. Now, Jake, where's Jake? Jake is going to ask you more. He's going to ask you to sign up for phone banks, and I got to thank everybody in this room. Mary, where's Mary, who worked so hard for me very last night and getting many of you people here. Gerald, who worked with me at the church.